What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Fish the Moment. In this video, each member of the Fish the Moment team is going to be sharing their top bait for September bass fishing. This is unlike any top 5 bait video you've ever seen on YouTube. You're going to get the top bait from 5 anglers in 5 different regions of the country. This means these baits are going to be extremely versatile and span a wide variety of applications, so you know exactly which baits are the top baits to throw in September. Let's get into it. I'll get us started with my top bait for September bass fishing, and that's a swim jig. But I don't fish a swim jig like most anglers. I'm not going to be fishing it shallow around docks or shallow grass. Instead, I'm going to be fishing it for suspended bass in 10 to 40 feet of water offshore. This is a technique I figured out last year, and it's absolutely deadly in these dog days of summer, late August, early September. What happens is that the bass are going to be breaking up out of the bigger schools that they were set up in June, July, and even August, and they're going to actually suspend around isolated pieces of cover in smaller groups, 3 to 10 bass. The bass in these trees, brush piles, and rock piles in August are going to be really good quality fish, 3 to 7 pounders, and they're going to suspend 10 to 15 feet down in all of these different types of cover over deeper water, maybe 30 to 60 feet. In these situations, you're going to have to get a bait that targets the suspended bass, but is also pretty weedless because you don't want to get hung up. This jig that I'm throwing is the Megabass Uoze Swimmer Swim Jig. It is really unique in the fact that it has basically a swim bait style hook, which really improves your hookup ratio when the suspended bass chase this bait and eat it. It also has a lighter weed guard, which protects it from getting hung up in trees and brush, but it also doesn't hurt your hookup ratio, because if you're fishing a regular swim jig with a standard jig hook and a heavier weed guard, and you're swimming it, those fish won't be able to crush the weed guard down and actually get the hook, and I've lost a lot of fish. Therefore, this Uoze Swimmer Swim Jig is perfect because it has the longer shank hook, lighter weed guard, and it also has this little underspin for some extra added action. The other thing about a swim jig that's great in this late summertime period, September, is that you can mimic baits that work really well early in the year, like a hair jig, for example, but it has a beefier profile, which means that you're going to target those bass that are more lethargic and just want one big meal. I actually have 2 setups for the swim jig that I throw. The first is a 1/2 ounce Megabass swim jig with a Strike King caffeine shad on the back. This is a straight tail fluke style bait, and I fish this jig just like I would a hair jig. I'm going to cast it out around standing timber, rocks, and brush where I see suspended bass on my graph. And then I'm going to burn my reel handle 5 or 6 times with my rod pointed in the sky, and I'll let that bait pop off the bottom and fall slowly past those suspended bass. The fish are going to bite this bait on the fall 95% of the time, and the combination of the 1/2 ounce swim jig with the caffeine shad fluke trailer is going to give this bait a nice slow glide past those fish. And just recently here, I've caught some absolute giants on Table Rock Lake with this exact setup. You're not going to get a ton of bites on this technique, but when you do, they're going to be 3 to 5 pounders almost every single time, especially because this bait is a pretty big meal for those bass. Now, another setup I use with this swim jig is going to be a more swimming style approach. In the summertime, earlier in the year, June, July, I like to fish a hollow belly swim bait on a just open jig head. But when you're getting into this late summer period, again, the bass are going to be tighter to cover, like brush and standing timber, so you want something that's a little more weedless. In this case, I'm going to the 3/4 ounce size of the Megabass swim jig and putting a 4.3 or 4.8 inch Kitech trailer on the back. I basically fish this exactly like I would a regular hollow belly swim bait or a regular paddle tail swim bait. I'm just going to cast it out and reel it slowly past those trees, counting it down to the level of the fish, let's say down to 10 or 15 feet of water, and trying to swim it right over the top of those fish's head. I'm not going to do anything crazy with the retrieve, just slowly reel it, maybe burn it a few times, let it stop, and the fish will absolutely crush this thing. I like the 3/4 ounce size. It keeps it down in the water column a little bit better as I'm reeling it. And I like the 1/2 ounce size when I'm fishing it as a kind of like a hair jig because it makes it fall and glide a little bit better. For my rod and equipment with this 1/2 ounce hair jig, I'm throwing it on a 7'2" medium heavy action Denali Covert Light bait casting rod with 12-pound Sunline, FC Sniper fluorocarbon, and a Black Max Abu Garcia reel, $50. I like that lighter line with this 1/2 ounce hair jig to help it fall, and I don't really have any problems getting hung up and breaking off with this jig, so I just go with 12-pound test to get the most natural fall possible. Now with the 3/4 ounce swim jig, it's a little bit heavier, so I'm going to throw it on a little bit heavier tackle. I'll be using a 7'6", heavy power, moderate fast action, covert light swim bait rod from Denali. This rod has a little bit of extra tip, so it's not a broomstick by any means, which is nice when you have that lighter wire swim bait hook in this jig, but it has enough backbone to cast this 3/4 ounce jig really effectively. I'm pairing this on 14-pound Sunline FC Sniper fluorocarbon, a little bit heavier line, not that much heavier, but a little bit heavier bait, so a little bit heavier line, and just an Abu Garcia Max Pro bait casting reel. I couldn't find any more Black Maxes, so I went up $70, really breaking the bank here with my reels. And this is a 7-to-1 gear ratio reel for fishing this bait. And this is really my go-to bait right now, guys. If I'm going out in September and I have to take one bait to the lake to fish offshore, I'm going with the swim jig. I can fish it for suspended bass, I can fish it through a lot of cover, and I know if I get bit, they're going to be big ones.
Hey guys, we're going to talk about my favorite September lure, and that's the Megabass S-Crank. And man, when I think about September bass fishing, I'm thinking about square bill crankbait fishing, like with the Megabass S-Crank. And a lot of different reasons for this. You know, in September, September is a big transitional month in bass fishing. You know, normally the lake levels are starting to drop a little bit. Daylight hours are getting shorter. And for whatever reason, there's some more quality fish that begin to move into that shallower water that you can target with the S-Crank crankbait. So what I'm looking for this is, the first thing is in consideration is I'm looking for off-colored water. So traditionally, normally I'm hunting the most dirty water I can find in the lake, and this is normally in the upper river arms and the creek arms of the lake. One of my favorite techniques is I like to run way up the river arms, way up the creek arms, and I fish whatever cover is available up there. One of my favorite things to fish is some type of a rocky bank or a channel swing bank. And I'll get right on the bank. It helps if you got a little bit of shade or a little bit of wind, but I'll get close to the bank and I'll parallel those banks with the S-Crank, making long casts and trying to hit and bounce off of that 1 to 3 foot zone. Now, the channel banks like that are really productive, but you can also catch them on the shallow flats, because most creeks and most river arms, they have two different compositions. They have a steep side, channel side, and the opposite is a flatter side. So you can not only catch them on the rocky banks, but you can also move across and catch them on the shallow flats. You know, fishing, my favorite is like a shallow stump, shallow laydown, any type of shallow wood, fishing it around dock corners, pitching it up underneath docks, bouncing it off whatever cover that you have available. That is the key, guys, right there. You have to remember, when you think in terms of square bill crankbait fishing in the month of September, think about always bouncing it off of something. You want that bait to be deflecting off of something, whether it's rock or wood, all the time. That's what's going to generate your strike. So anyway, guys, main keys to remember: find your dirty water, fish whatever shallow cover you have available, go with a fairly fairly medium stop and go retrieve, and it's just a great way to catch quality bass all summer long and into the fall. So we'll see you.
What's up, y'all? Earlier you heard Johnny talk about how them schools will be offshore in them big groups from June and July. Then August comes and they start kind of breaking up, and some head shallow, some will stay out there deep and suspending them trees and just around other types of structure. Well, Johnny talked about how he'll go out there and catch them in the trees. I'm going to talk about how I go after them shallow fish that break from them schools. Catching the trees can be fun, but I know a lot of us know that that's not our game. As me, that's not one of my strengths, to go out and catch them fish in the trees. So I like to target them fish that go shallow. The areas I'm going to target are going to be your creeks, and I'm going to follow those creek channels and then follow the ditches off the creek channels that go into flats. So I'm going to look for flats, but if there are not any creek channels related to it or ditches that go into the channel, I won't fish those flats. Now on these flats, the pieces of cover that I'm going to target are going to be your stumps, your laydowns, standing timber, brush, and underwater grass such as hydrilla. Now, the water that I'm fishing, y'all, is going to be really muddy. I mean, like inches of visibility, or could be stained water that is 1 to 3 foot of visibility. Now, y'all, the bait that I'm going to throw to target these pieces of cover is the bladed jig. Now, just so y'all know, the bladed jig doesn't catch my numbers of fish, but this bait will catch my bigger fish in these areas. And that's why I'm sharing this with y'all today. I will throw both the original chatterbait and the jackhammer. There are days that they're going to want one over the other. And so that's why I'm sharing that with y'all today. So if you're throwing the chatterbait and it's not getting any bites, go ahead and pick up the jackhammer and give it a shot. Y'all, the rod that I'm going to use to throw my bladed jigs is going to be the Denali Covert Light 6'9" medium heavy spinnerbait rod. I'm going to use a gear ratio reel that is a 6.2 to 1, and I've actually learned in the last 2 years that I've had a lot more success with the slower gear ratio reel than a faster one. Y'all, on my line, I will throw this when I'm fishing a lot of heavy cover, or even the heavier areas with the hydrilla with braid, but typically I'm going to throw this on monofilament line. I will use a Sunline Super Mono from the 14 pound to 16 pound range. I use a heavier mono just since I am fishing it around cover and pretty dense structure. On my retrieve, I'm going to fish all the pieces of cover similar, but let's talk about like the hydrilla, since that's what I'm fishing it in right now, and I've had really success in last year and the previous year around the hydrilla down here in the shallower water. So I'm going to find them clumps and them patches, and I'm going to throw this down each side of the patch first. I'm going to not hit the hydrilla, but get as close as I can. And if there's any fish that's aggressive, it will come out and eat this right away. If I don't, in my first 2 casts get bit, then I want to throw and try to nick the clump of hydrilla to try to create a reaction strike. Now, if I'm fishing water that's a little deeper, anywhere from 4 to 6, 7 foot, and I can't see the hydrilla come all the way up to the top, I will throw this above the clumps of hydrilla as well. Now, as you're just thinking, well, hey, if you don't see the hydrilla, how do you know it's there? Y'all, I will use my my Garmin perspective mode, and I will scan these flats and look in front of me of what I'm fishing. I'll use it to target the laydowns, the stumps, and these pieces of grass underwater.
In the northern part of the country, we start to see a drastic change in weather conditions. At the start of the month of September, we may have those dog days of summer. By the end of the month of September, we may have straight fall days where we're only hitting barely 60 degrees with lows overnight down into the 30s. What that does is it drops the water temperature pretty drastically during the month of September, leading to transition from summer to fall areas for both species of bass. It can make fishing pretty difficult because it scatters them out. You may have fish that are in 40 feet of water, you may have fish that are only in a few inches of water, and therefore fishing can be tough, but you want to fish those migration areas, those routes that are going to take them from shallow water to deep water, because most of the fish by the end of October will be in significantly deeper water. Therefore, you're going to be concentrating on your break lines, your points, humps, rock transitions, the edges of flats, that type of area where those fish are going to be feeding, but slowly moving out as we get more into the month of October. It's really a tough period to fish, but because of that, I think you want to concentrate on using a bait like this little guy here. This is a Dirty Jigs Matt Stefan Guppy swim bait jig head paired up with a Kitech 3.3 boot tail swimmer. You can use whatever swim bait you like, but the key here is a small bait fish presentation, because the fish are going to be keying in on bait fish to start feeding up for the fall months. It's a great bait to help you cover a lot of water. You can fish it both shallow, you can fish it deep. It's a great bait to catch those fish that are going to be scattered all over the place, because you're probably not going to find those big schools of fish during the month of September. I like to pair it up with some 6 or 8 pound fluorocarbon fishing line. I throw it on a longer spinning rod. This is a 7.5 foot MHX SJ9000 rod that I build, so it's a medium light 7.5 foot rod. And then for a reel, I just like a good spinning reel like this Abu Garcia Revo MG Extreme spinning reel. So I will pair that up with a fluorocarbon leader of about 20 feet, and I'll put it on some Berkley X9 braided line. I like the high vis line just so I can see and feel the bites a little bit better. But you got to remember, when you're fishing this bait, You want to fish it with just a slow, steady retrieve, maybe working a few stop and goes here and there. If you're trying to keep the bait on the bottom, cast it out, let it fall to the bottom, crank the handle a few times, let it pendulum back to the bottom, crank it up a few times, pendulum to the bottom. It creates a yo-yo action that keeps your bait near the bottom, but it's a good way to catch fish during this tough month. Give it a try, guys. If you live in the northern region, you're going to start to see water temperatures cooling off pretty drastically, and a small swim bait's a great way to catch those fish for you.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Myles Burgoff for Fish the Moment, and I want to share with you one of my favorite techniques for that September, early October time period. You know, late summer, early fall on the TVA. Now, most TVA lakes like Lake Chickamauga, we've got a lot of vegetation, and what happens in September is that throughout the early summer, that vegetation has grown to its thickest point. So the canopies are dense, the light penetration is at an all-time low for the year, and what happens is those root systems start breaking down. The canopy stays for the most part, but the root system starts breaking down, so it creates those tunnels that those fish can kind of roam around and ambush prey in. And so one of the best techniques for approaching this situation is with a punching rig. Going after them. This right here, I'm using an ounce or ounce and a half tungsten weight, pegging it to the line. Got a little tungsten flipping bead, and I like to use an EWG hook. I use a 4-aught heavy duty 959 hook from Hayabusa, and then the bait that I use, I love a Z-Man palmetto bugs. That is my favorite punching bait. I've caught a lot of fish on that. And then of course the rest of your tackle has to be pretty heavy duty. We've got 65-pound Seagar Smackdown braid is what I use pretty much strictly when I'm punching, and then you're gonna want to use a very stout 7.5. This one right here is a 7/8 heavy action flipping stick from Fitzgerald, and then I like a 7.2 to 1 gear ratio. I think that is a perfect gear ratio for punching. Gives you a lot of torque to be able to wrench those fish out of that heavy cover, but it also gives you enough speed to be efficient. And all I'm doing this time of year is covering water. You get on that grass edge and you just start covering water, making very quick pitches, you know, maybe raise the bait a couple times underneath the mat, and if you're not getting a bite, you just make another presentation. But just cover water, find those key little stretches that those fish are going to be, you know, just condensed in, and then you start picking that grass apart. But overall, the punching rig is definitely my favorite technique for TVA late summer and early fall fishing.
Really quick, if you guys enjoy the content in this video and want more personalized instruction, head to our website, fishthemoment.com. Then go to the virtual lessons page. Here you can book one-on-one virtual lessons with each member of the Fish the Moment team. In these 1-hour lessons, the Fish the Moment team member will break down your lake using Google Earth and a contour line map and answer any questions you have. Whether you're preparing for an upcoming fishing tournament or a fun weekend on the lake, make sure you sign up for one of these one-on-one virtual lessons so you're fully prepared to catch as many fish as possible on the water. Check them out at fishthemoment.com.